Welcome to the recording of the JBQ Official Guidelines training. For this training, we will be using the most current JBQ Official Guidelines, which is the September 2015 version. This training will take approximately 45 minutes, and then there's also a video recording of how to use the Scorekeeper software, which is about 8 minutes that you can watch after this. We will go over the current guidelines. We'll talk about the general information about the quiz meets and also the specific training for the officials, including the timekeeper, judge, scorekeeper, and quizmaster. I also have on the screen information about our JBQ section app that you can download for Apple and Android, and then also our JBQ website, which is jbqkcsection.com. This is where the training will be saved at, along with other useful information that you can use on that website. Okay, the first slide talks about the purpose of JBQ, and this is actually in the forward found on page 3 of your guidelines. And so these are the 4 F's of JBQ: facts, fun, fellowship, and faithfulness. And our goal in JBQ is to have friendly, uncomplicated quizzing, and the JBQ guidelines are to be used in order to help us accomplish that goal. New in the guidelines this year is on page 4. It actually talks about the different levels of quizzing. So it actually explains a little bit about what those different levels are. For example, the section quizzing, which is what we have, the Kansas City section. Then the next is the district, Southern Missouri district, then regional, national, and then there's also invitational tournaments that can happen throughout the year. Okay. So to start the actual training, we'll talk first about the team arrangements. So again, a little bit more about the quiz meet and kind of general guidelines, and then we'll talk about specific officials. So on page 5, section 1 talks about team arrangements. So for the team, there are 4 quizzers per team seated facing the officials as the preferred method. You can have fewer than 4 quizzers to make a team, but you do have to have a minimum at the beginning of a match to qualify as a team. You can have up to 8 quizzers on one team, but of course only 4 quiz at any one given time. So you, in essence, could have 4 quizzers plus 4 substitutes. There's no conferring between team members, substitute coaches, or assistant coaches during the quiz meet, except during timeouts. So timeouts can be called, and those are 30 seconds each. The assistant coach can communicate non-verbally with the coach during the quiz meet, and what that's mainly used for is if the assistant coach is taking score and wants to show the coach something, you can definitely pass that score sheet back and forth. That is definitely allowed. Again, non-verbal is okay, verbal is not. The person designated as the head coach must remain so for the duration of that match. But the head coach can change from one match to another during the quiz meet. So again, if you have a head coach and an assistant coach, you guys can actually alternate as being the head coach on each match. But again, during any one given match, the head coach must remain the same person during that match. Okay. Page 6 talks about being on time. Any scheduled orientation is an integral part of each competition. So we're going to talk about Kansas City section specifically. The officials must be checked in by 8:45. We will give the awards from the prior month. We will start that by 9 a.m. for the Kansas City section. If everybody's ready to go at 8:45, we will start at 8:45. So again, we want to get started as soon as we can. Teams will have 5 minutes between matches to get from room to room. So that should allow for a very quick restroom break and again to get to the next match after you just finished one. Any forfeitures must be decided by the JBQ coordinators for that meet. Each head coach is responsible for obtaining a written schedule for the meet. For Kansas City, the church coordinators will actually meet with me at the very beginning of the meet before we get started, and I will give them the schedules for each of the teams and then also their official assignments. So you will actually get that from your church coordinator. Okay, rules for play starts at the bottom of page 6. So all of the questions will be taken from the Bible Fact Pack, and that is using the NIV 2011 version of the Bible. Quizzers should place their hands on the table, palms down, feet with both feet on the floor if they can reach it. And again, that's mainly just so that the quizzers aren't disturbing the other quizzers. The quizmaster will identify quizzers by color and number, for example, red 1 or green 2. And then kind of best practice is to not reset the quiz equipment until the ruling is completed. So for example, quizmaster reads the question, red 1 buzzes in, state red 1, leave the light on the quiz box lit until the quizzer answers, and then the quizmaster gives the ruling that is correct for 10 points red 1, and then clear it. That's just to make sure that the right quizzer received the points, and again, it's just best practice. You have 5 seconds to buzz in once the quizmaster finishes reading the question. 30 seconds to give the answer, and that's once the quizmaster calls on the quizzer by color and number. So red 1, as soon as that is said, then there's 30 seconds to give the answer. If the quizzer interrupts the reading of a question, the quizmaster should immediately stop reading and state interruption. For interrupted questions, the quizzer must then complete the question in essence and then give the answer. If a question is judged incorrect, the question is reread for the opposing team. So again, if a red 1 buzzes in, answer is ruled incorrect, the question, and it was interrupted, the question will then reread it for the opposing team. If the quizzer buzzes in between the calling of question and the reading of the question, a foul will be called. Something a little bit new in the guidelines is it kind of talks about that a little bit. It's called the introductory remarks. We state, for example, question number 1 for 10 points. That information that I just said is called the introductory remarks. Stating the first question is just kind of calling everyone's attention to let everyone know, hey, we're getting ready to start. If someone buzzes in on that first question, there's actually no foul called. Just reset the equipment and start over. But if they buzz in after you state question, then you say question number 1 for 10 points, anything in that information, that is when, again, stop reading, call a foul, and then reread the question. If the quiz box indicates a tie between the members of the same team, the head coach will decide which quizzer answers. I personally have not seen this, but again, it is possible. So if there is a tie between the same 2 quizzers on the same team, then the head coach decides which quizzer answers. If the quizmaster fails to call an interruption, a judge may also state interruption. If neither the judge nor the quizmaster calls interruption, then the quizzer is not required to complete the question part of that answer. Okay, the next section is judging answers and completions, and that starts on page 8 of the guidelines. A question is ruled correct, or a response is ruled correct, when it contains all the basic information called for in the fact pack. Question is also correct when the answer portion to a quotation question is given word for word as contained in the fact pack and the references included. Again, you can give that reference either at the beginning or end of the answer, but it must be given. A response is correct when the judges rule that the quizzer's completion of an interrupted question is the same basic question. So if a question is interrupted, the quizzer must finish that question, but again, it's only in essence. It does not have to be word for word. A response is also correct when a mispronunciation of any word is still clearly recognizable as the words required. And that's for a quotation or non-quotation. If they mispronounce something but you know what they're saying, then it's still correct. And a response is correct once all correct information called for in a response is completely given. A response to a question is incorrect when the quizzer fails to give the correct information before calling of time. I actually call that incomplete because they didn't quite finish everything needed, but it is still incorrect, and they will get the negative points for that. A response is incorrect when incorrect information is given before the response is completed, or when any word or portion of a word is omitted, repeated, added, or changed in the answer to a quotation question. So again, the answer portion of a quotation question must be given word for word according to the fact pack. A response is incorrect when failing to speak loudly or clearly enough for the judges to understand the response, or when the quizzer fails to complete an interrupted question before giving the answer. So again, if an interruption is called, the quizzer must complete the question first before then giving the answer. A response is incorrect when the judges rule that a quizzer's own coach or team member gave the quizzer obvious help. And then a response is incorrect when a quotation question answer contains words not in the fact pack. So again, a quotation must be word for word. Some general guidelines for judging answers and completions. Words or phrases separated by or require only one of those words or phrases to be ruled correct. Questions or answers that include the conjunction and require all of the words or phrases to be given to be ruled correct. Questions requiring a specific number require only that number. For example, if a question says list 7, then the answer may actually give 9 or 10 responses, but the quizzer only needs to give 7 in order for the answer to be correct. Words in brackets are optional or may be substituted for similar or previous words. I have 2 examples on the screen. For example, the Garden of Gethsemane, or the quizzer can just say Gethsemane, and then Jesus Christ. They can either say Jesus, they can say Christ, or they can say Jesus Christ. Okay, the next section is scoring. So this is helpful for the scorekeepers. This starts on page 10 of the guidelines. A correct response by a quizzer is given the full point value. In JBQ, we have 10, 20, and 30-point questions. So if the answer is correct, they will receive that full point value. An incorrect response deducts half of the point value. So for example, if it's a 10-point question, unfortunately it's incorrect, then that quizzer will receive a minus 5 points for his score. A quizzer responding correctly to 6 questions receives a 10-point bonus. We call that a quiz out. And then a quizzer foul deducts 5 points from the quizzer's score. So any fouls are negative 5 points. Team fouls also deduct 5 points from the team score. Okay, the next section is timeout and substitutions, and that's also on page 10. Each team is allowed 3 30-second timeouts during regulation, which is the regular quiz match, which is 20 questions. Any unused timeouts from regulation may be used during overtime if there's an overtime. Either the head coach or the team captain may request a timeout. And upon calling of time, all discussion must cease. So when the timekeeper actually says time, the 30 seconds are up, everyone needs to stop talking and come back so that the quizmaster can read the next question. Quizzer substitutions may be made during timeouts or immediately following the calling of time. So if a question, if a timeout is called on question 10, you want to make a substitute, that's a good time to do it, is right then, or immediately when the timekeeper calls time, then you can make that substitution. The quizmaster should note that there's a new quizzer in the match, and at that point, he will ask that quizzer to buzz in, state their name, make sure that the quiz equipment is still working, and then they'll continue on with the match. A quizzer must leave the match and cannot re-enter when any one of the following occurs. So if the quizzer accumulates 3 fouls, then they need to sit out from the match. If the quizzer has 3 incorrect responses, we call that a backwards quiz out. They need to step out. And if the quizzer has 6 correct responses, that's a quiz out. They get a 10-point bonus, but then again, they're not allowed to answer any questions after that. So they need to scoot back from the table or again move back and sit next to the coach. For any of the items above, a substitution may be made without calling a timeout. So if a quizzer must leave because of either 3 fouls, a quiz out, or a backwards quiz out, the quizzer will sit back by the coach, and at that point, if you have a substitute, you can go ahead and put that substitute in for that quizzer. And you do not have to call a timeout in order to do that. Okay, the next section is fouls, specifically team fouls. So this is on page 11 of the guidelines. A team foul occurs if a quizzer, coach, or substitute improperly confers, and this is either before a timeout is granted or after time has been called during the timeout. So again, remember that once time is called by the timekeeper, cease talking and get ready for the next question. A team foul will also be called if a coach calls a point of order related to judging answers and completions when only a judge's ruling is allowed. We'll actually discuss the judge's ruling just a little bit in the training. Team foul will also occur if a team calls a 4th timeout in regulation or a 5th timeout in overtime. Again, only 3 timeouts are allowed during the regular match, the first 20 questions. If there's an overtime, an extra timeout is allowed. The help hindrance foul occurs when improper help or hindrance from team members, coaches, or audience is noticed. Again, that would be a team foul. Or if a coach calls for a 3rd judge's ruling in a match, that would be a team foul. Only 2 judges' rulings are allowed. Quizzer fouls occur when a quizzer activates the equipment after calling a question and the first word of a question. These are called introductory remarks. We talked about these just a minute ago. So if Quizmaster says question number 1, the buzzer quizzes in. At that point, that's a foul. Reread the question. If a quizzer begins to respond before being recognized by the quizmaster, then that is a foul. If a quizzer begins to respond when another quizzer was recognized by the quizmaster, that is also a foul. So if the quizmaster calls red 1 and green 1 starts to respond, then green 1 gets a foul. And also there could be a foul if a quizzer demonstrates unsportsmanlike conduct. There is a note here. Assessed fouls are not disregarded if a question on which they occur is voided. So again, if a question is voided, the foul still applies. Okay, the next section is voiding questions, and this is page 12 of the guidelines. Generally speaking, when a question is voided, a substitute question of equal value is read. So if a 10-point question is read, something happens and the question is voided, then another 10-point question will be read in its place. Questions should be voided in the following situations. If the point value or any word of the question is read by the quizmaster differs from the fact pack. So if the quizmaster stumbles, makes a mistake, calls the wrong point value, whatever it may be, that question should be voided and a substitute question read. If there's obvious help or hindrance from the audience, coaches, team members, or officials, that question should be voided. If a quizzer remains illegally in the quiz match and responds to a question, all the questions that quizzer responded to must be voided from that point forward. So, for example, say your quizzer has 6 questions correct. At that point, he should be removed from the match, gets a 10-point bonus, which again is called a quiz out. But say no one noticed that, he actually answers a 7th question. At that point, that 7th question needs to be voided and a substitute read because that quizzer should not have been able to answer that question. And if the quiz equipment indicates a tie between the opposite teams, so between the red and green team, at that point the question should be voided. Again, I've never seen that, but it is possible that that could happen. If it's proven that the quiz equipment is not functioning, then questions back to that point at which the equipment began to malfunction must be voided and substitutes read for each one. For the Kansas City section, we train the quiz masters that after the 10th question, go ahead and just take a quick have everyone just very quickly buzz in. They don't need to state their name or anything else, but just very quickly buzz in, test the equipment, and that way we make sure that the equipment is working before we get started, also at the 10th question, so that way in case anything happens, we're not voiding an entire match, but maybe just a few questions at that point. A question is voided if the judges reverse a decision of correct on an interrupted question. And I think we'll talk about this a little bit later, but that's if red one interrupts, answers, the quizmaster says correct, there may be like a judge's vote. They then say it's incorrect. That question will then be voided, and then a new question read for the opposite team. If a quizzer other than the one identified by the quizmaster begins to answer, that question should be voided. Okay, substitute questions should be read for both teams unless one of these situations occur. If a question is voided because of what occurs in the rereading or answering of an interrupted question, the new question is read only for the team to whom the interrupted question was being reread. So, for example, if red one buzzes in, it's incorrect, we reread that same question for the green team, something happens, and now we need to void the question will be voided, a substitute question read, but that question will only be read for the green team because that's who the question was being reread to. If the quizmaster had recognized the wrong quizzer and the quizzer begins to answer, then that question will be reread for that team. If a question is voided due to a help or hindrance by an opposing coach or official, then we'll void the question. Substitute question is only read for the offended team. So again, in this case, if something's happening, a question is voided due to red team, then the new question is only read for the green team because they were the offended team. If the judges reverse a correct decision on an interrupted question, the new question is read only for the other team. And we talked about that just a moment ago. Okay, the next section is handling errors in response. So if a quizzer wrongly responds is not the one recognized by the quizmaster, if they are on the opposing team from the quizzer recognized by the quizmaster, stop the quizzer, assess a foul, and read a new question for the offended team. So in this situation, the example would be if the quizmaster calls red one, but yet green one starts to answer, then stop green one, assess a foul for green one, you avoid the question, and then you read a substitute question just for the red team. If the quizzer wrongly responds is on the same team as the quizzer recognized, stop the quizzer, assess a foul, void the question, and then read a new question for the opposing team. So in this case, if again, red one is recognized by the quizmaster, but red two starts the answer, stop red two, assess the foul to red two, void the question, and then read the new question for just the green team. If the quizzer incorrectly identified by the quizmaster begins to answer, the question is voided, no foul, and substitute question is read only for the team that initially responded. So again, if quizmaster made a mistake, we don't want the quizzers to be affected by that. So in this case, if red one buzzed in, but the quizmaster actually said green one, and green one starts to answer because that's who was he recognized, that green one should not receive a foul in that case. We will void the question, no foul though, but then the substitute question is read just for that red team because they are the ones that initially responded. Okay, next section is tie games. That's page 13 of your guidelines. If there is a tie game, the quizmaster will announce the tie, state the scores, and then you'll prepare for an overtime. Both teams and officials, everybody has 60 seconds for the teams to regroup between the official ending of the regular match and then the overtime period. Each team also gets an additional timeout during that period. Again, it's just a normal 30-second timeout. There will be 3 questions, 1, 10, 20, and 30-point question will be all asked, but in random order, so it won't necessarily be in that order. At the end of those 3 questions, if there's still a tied game, then the match will go into what we call sudden death. At that point, all 20-point questions will be read until the tie is broken. So at that point, if either someone gets it correct or incorrect, the tie would be broken and then the game would be over. Okay, the next section is point of order, and that is on page 14 of the guidelines. A point of order attempts to correct a procedural error or call attention to a possible rule violation. If a coach calls a point of order, they should briefly state the basis or whatever the rule violation is of their request. And we'll talk about what those points of orders are here in just a second. And then either the head or assistant coach has the right to call point of order in any of the following examples. Quizzers may also call point of order under examples 1 and 2 of what we're about to talk about. So just examples 1 and 2. So here are the examples. So if the quiz equipment needs to be reset, then the quizzers or the coaches can call point of order. At that point, again, red one buzzed in, gave the answer, was called correct. The quizmaster starts to go to the next question. Someone should just state point of order, the quiz equipment needs to be reset. They'll reset that and then continue on with the next question. If the quizmaster calls the number of the next question without reading an interrupted question, then again, a quizzer or a coach can call a point of order on that. Again, just state point of order. That question was interrupted. It needs to be reread to the green team. The rest of the examples we're about to go through, only the coach or assistant coach can call point of orders on these. So no quizzers can call on these. If a quizzer remains illegally in the match, so again, if a quizzer has 6 correct for a quiz out, a backwards quiz out, or 3 fouls, a coach or assistant coach needs to call a point of order. The quizzer has a quiz out, or point of order, that quizzer has 3 fouls. If a wrong point value is read by the quizmaster, again, your judges and scorekeepers are going to know this. If you see the quizmaster says question number 1 for 10 points, but it should actually be 20, just state point of order, that's 20 points. So that way the quizmaster can correct the error, reread the question, and again, continue with the match. If there's any rule violation that occurs other than judging answers and completions, again, a coach or head coach can call a point of order. And just a note here, a point of order must be called before the calling of the next question, before a timeout is permitted, or before the match is closed. Excuse me. So if something happens, you're on question number 8, before the quizmaster goes to question number 9, if there's an issue, call point of order at that point. Once you go on to the next question, that point of order cannot be called. It's too late at that point. I guess the key on that is really just call the point of order as soon as you notice it. Okay, the next section is judges ruling, and that is on page 15 of the guidelines. A judge's ruling can be called by the head coach only, so the assistant coach cannot call a judge's ruling. The coach must be recognized by the quizmaster. The coach then has 30 seconds to state the request and the reason, which is usually tied to a rule violation. And then 2 judges' rulings are allowed per team per match, including overtime. There is no additional judges ruling in overtime, like you get a timeout. So you have a total of 2 judges ruling per match. The judge's ruling itself is a request to reverse a decision of correct or incorrect, and it should be based on judging answers and completions, which I believe is section 4 in the guidelines. Once the head coach gives the reason for their judge's ruling, then an initial vote by the judges using coins is taken. So at that point, if you believe the answer or the judge's ruling, what the coach had talked about, if the answer is correct, it's heads up. If it's incorrect, tails up. If the initial vote is not unanimous, the officials can then confer inside the room. They'll then take a second vote. At that point, majority rules. The quizmaster tells what the decision was made, and then the matter is closed and you move on to the next question. Again, for the judge's ruling, the head coach is the only one allowed to make that. Again, they need to base it on the rules. So, for example, say the question was list 7 items, and then the quizzer actually gave 7, but maybe the officials didn't hear, or they were looking at, saw 10 listed. Well, you only need to give 7. So the coach at that point needs to try and figure out what happened. Why was that ruled incorrect? We need to change the ruling to correct because the quizzer listed all the information given in the fact pack. They listed the 7 items. They only needed to list 7 items, not the additional items. So again, it's just kind of 30 seconds to very quickly state what you think happened and why the official should change the ruling either from correct to incorrect or vice versa. The next section is actually compiling question sets for the competition. I have this in here. It will be done by the JBQ coordinators, whether you're at the section, district, competition. So it is in there. It's about on page 15. I'm not actually going to go over it, but that's just to let you know that is in the guidelines and talks about that. But that should be done for you, so nothing that anybody needs to worry about. Okay, the next section is the guidelines for the actual quiz officials. So we've talked about the general rules and guidelines governing the match. Now we'll actually talk about the specific duties of the officials. So on page 17, specifically talks about the duties of the quizmaster. So the quizmaster has general oversight of the match. Prior to the match, he or she will answer any questions concerning procedure. Quizmaster will have the officials, coaches, and substitutes of each team and also the officials introduce themselves. And then they'll also remind the teams and audience of the need for quiet, turn off cell phones, that type of thing. Quizmaster makes certain prayers offered over the match. Again, you can ask a quizzer to do that or do it yourself. They attempt to keep the match running smoothly and pressure-free. And if a quizzer is not obviously correct or incorrect, they should allow the full 30 seconds to respond. Remember, the question is either correct or incorrect based on what information they give, but they do have 30 seconds to respond. So if they haven't said anything incorrect, let them have that 30 seconds. They may actually get the answer in that time frame. At the end of the 20th question, the quizmaster should declare the match closed. Next section is about the timekeeper, and I believe that's page 18 in the guidelines. Actually, that's page 19 in the guidelines. All time periods should be called loudly. The timekeeper actually says time at the conclusion of each time period. Those time periods are 5 seconds to respond to a question. So again, quizmaster finishes the question at the very last word. You then start the 5 seconds. Quizzer has 30 seconds to respond after being recognized. So again, wait until the quizmaster actually says red 1. At that point, start the 30 seconds. It's 30 seconds for a timeout. Again, wait until the quizmaster says timeout, green team. 30 seconds to request a judge's ruling. So again, at that point, the coach would ask for a judge's ruling. The quizmaster would say, go ahead. That gives them 30 seconds. And then there's also 60 seconds to regroup prior to an overtime period. The next section is the specific duties of the scorekeeper, and that's page 20 in the guidelines. The scorekeeper will obtain the names of the teams, quizzers, and substitutes. Scorekeeper will also check for the correct point values of the questions as the quizmaster calls the questions. If the scorekeeper notices the quizmaster called the wrong point value, immediately call that to the attention of the quizmaster. So just state, point of order, wrong point value is called, or point of order, that should have been 20 points. The scorekeeper will record all quizzers' points, deductions, fouls, and bonus points. Scorekeeper also keeps records of the timeouts and lets the quizmaster know if a team calls a fourth timeout in regulation. The scorekeeper will also inform the quizmaster when a quizzer must leave the match. Remember, that's for a quiz out, backwards quiz out, or 3 fouls. And at the conclusion of the match, the scorekeeper will compare the score with the coaches, make sure there's no discrepancies, and have the coaches verify those scores. And then the last section is the general duties of all judges. So the judges will or have the ability to call fouls. Judges will make decisions regarding the correctness of the responses. The judges can also call for a judge's vote. And so what this is if the quizmaster calls an answer correct, but you as a judge are looking at the answer and think, I don't agree with that. At that point, just say, point of order, I'd like to call for a judge's vote. At that point, the judges just vote with their coins. Again, heads for correct, tails for incorrect. And then the quizmaster will announce if there's a change in the ruling. A judge's ruling, which is called by the head coach. We talked about that just a few moments ago. The judges will also help with handling equipment problems and also the incorrect identification of quizzer. So I just mentioned this about the judge's vote, though. If a judge disagrees with the quizmaster, they can request a vote of the judges. Again, no conferring, just vote. Majority rules. And then again, if the quizmaster's decision is overruled, he will announce that decision. Okay, that is actually the end of the guidelines. There is also a glossary of terms, a pronunciation guide, and also an example of the score sheet in the guidelines. So those are the last few pages. At this point, if you are a scorekeeper or would like to be a scorekeeper, there is another video on the website that actually goes over the scorekeeper computer program that we use for Kansas City. It's an easy scorekeeping program training. So if you click on that link, it's about 8 minutes. It literally goes through the software with you. So everything we talked about in this training still applies. It's just that the computer actually does kind of all the math for you and makes it a little bit easier. So it's a lot easier for us to tally the scores using the software. So that, again, that concludes the JBQ official guidelines training. And again, the website to find that scorekeeper video is jbqkcsection.com. Thank you.